All right, folks, we are live. Welcome to the inaugural DefChat 2015, hosted by yours truly, Mike Skiff, and my good buddy.
Hey guys, Tristan Manning here.
We are honored and privileged to be able to host the inaugural DefChat 2015, and we've got a very special guest, Ori Brafman, who hails from San Francisco. He is the co-author of The Starfish and the Spider and the New York Times bestseller Sway. He's a renowned organizational expert. He regularly consults with Fortune 500 corporations, and for the past 3 years, he has been working with General Martin Dempsey, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, to introduce chaos theory into the Army. He's also a graduate of Stanford Business School. As I mentioned, he lives in San Francisco. Ori, welcome to the first DefChat.
Thanks for having me. It's an honor.
Yeah, absolutely. And just for those that are not aware, DEF stands for Defense Entrepreneurs Forum, and they've been gracious enough to host this event and bring Ori on board here. And we're just gonna dive right in. Ori, first of all, tell us a little bit more about your background. I know you're in San Francisco right now, but give us a quick overview of kind of your journey and how you ended up where you are now, working with General Dempsey in the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Sure. So I'm actually right now sitting in North Carolina, but I do live in San Francisco. So I was born in Israel and grew up in Texas. I moved there when I was 9, so that explains my weird accent. And then moved to the Bay Area where I went to undergrad and grad school. In 2006, I wrote a book called The Starfish and the Spider. And of course, the metaphor is that if you cut off the head of a spider, it dies, but you cut off the arm of a starfish, it goes on back. Now, a few years pass and the book starts circulating around very different parts of our country. My undergrad degree is from UC Berkeley. I was a peace studies major, so you can imagine that it was kind of surprising to hear from this guy I never heard of, Marty Dempsey, and he said, hey, can you come and talk to us a little bit about your thoughts and about how they apply to fighting international terrorism. At the time, this was actually the first conversation I had with a person in uniform. I showed up at his office not knowing what a 4-star general was. I was like, is there a 5-star general? And he's like, no. And I didn't know what to call him, so I called him Marty. And we discussed how the Army of today, in order to, we don't know what the future is going to hold, right? Whether it's a traditional combat or whether it's an insurgency, and all we know is that we need to be agile in order to prepare for an uncertain future. So the question becomes then, how do we create and train agility within the force? And we've been working on a number of projects over these last years about creating small starfish circles. So think about organizations like Alcoholics Anonymous or Wikipedia, working on a very distributed way in order to create innovation within the Army.
Very cool. Very cool. So on the on that topic, you started the Chaos Imperative. I think that's your most recent book. Is that right?
It is the most recent. Yes.
Yeah, so you launched into that book talking about your office call with General Dempsey, and basically, he's asking you how he can change the Army in 6+ years of you interacting with him since that initial office call. What do you think an institute that is as massive as the Army, how can they make cultural changes in such a large organization like that, just based on your experience and based on the time you spent with General Dempsey?
So first of all, it's been a privilege, and I drive a Audi diesel in San Francisco, and I think it's the only car in San Francisco that has an Army Strong sticker on it.
Nice.
For me, my biggest impression has been how, regardless of politics, when we sit down in the same room, me being from Berkeley and someone being an infantry person, our values that we share are actually more than the politics that divide us. And specifically, if we just focus on these ways in which we as a nation can work together rather than sit there and fight each other. So I think the first element is really the human dimension. I know General Bob Brown from CAC is working on this, but really this idea of building cultural bridges, if you will, between different parts of our own country. The second is, how do you create the flow of information? So it strikes me that regardless of your position, whether you're enlisted or you're an officer, when you could be the coolest person in the world, if you're a general and you're coming into a room, everyone's going to be all of a sudden stiff, all of a sudden they're going to be telling you what you want to hear. It's very, very difficult to gain knowledge from the edge of the network. So the question becomes, how do you actually institutionalize that kind of knowledge, grabbing it from the edge? And the third element is innovation. Think about being on the very top of a huge organization, and everything that you do is going to be scrutinized, whether it's by Congress or by the press. It's very, very difficult to innovate in the limelight. And what I think is much more effective is to have these pockets of chaos that innovate on the sidelines. And the nice thing about that is that if something cool happens, like whether it's Defense Entrepreneurs Forum or whether it's other things where people are doing it on their own time, out of uniform, you encourage that, and you find the things that really work well. And all you have to do is just Dempsey did something wonderful. We had a group of women at Fort Hood, and they started the Women's Mentorship Network, which is a volunteer-run network where people can both be mentors and mentees. And we had the first training, and it was a bunch of kind of tended on the younger side, and all of a sudden the phone rings, and it's General Dempsey calling to just congratulate these women about doing such an awesome job and helping our force. And just those small encouragements can make such a huge difference. And I think we focus so much on stuff that we can measure as opposed to let's be very creative. Let's make my good friend Peter Sims wrote a book called Little Bets. Let's make a lot of little bets, find out which ones actually work, and then amplify the ones that are successes.
Ori, when you talked about having little pockets of, we like to call them in the service, pockets of insurgency, whereas, it's not top down, it's more of these little pockets of networks that actually influence change. Do you feel that that would actually be more of an advantage for change in a big system like the military service, or do you think it does have to be forced from top down? The reason why I ask that is because, there are a lot of military leaders, whether, like you said, officer or enlisted, that are very innovative, but because of the kind of the bureaucratic system that is ran to make sure the military runs efficiently, we find a lot of disgruntled or just a lot of leaders choose to leave the organization because it's such a hurdle to influence change like that. Do you think that is one way that we can kind of, do you think that's the best and only way that we can influence change in the military?
Yeah, I think sometimes with the military, a little bit like, was it Lenny in of Mice and Men, right? Who had
yeah, Lenny, yeah.
Was it Lenny or was it George? Whichever of the guys who had the rabbit, and he like.
Yeah, pet it too hard. Yeah,
petted it too hard and kind of pet it to death. And
yeah.
I don't think that's just the military. I think it's any large organization is going to be resistant to change, and specifically sure. The middle of the organization is going to be the most entrenched because they're going to be like, hey, you're coming and you're going, but right. It helps us just kind of, and there's a good reason for that, right?
Yeah.
You don't want an organization like the military to make huge swerves all of a sudden. This is defending our country. This is the institution that we depend on. I think, though, that we have a false dichotomy in our heads. We either try to innovate from the top down and then get very frustrated about pushing the bureaucracy, or we leave. And I'm saying that there's a third option, which is the gray area. Just like you guys, I mean, I'm just looking at your, I don't know if you're on post or not, but this is not an official Army sanctioned event. Which is why I think it can be very innovative. And how do you pay attention to kind of stuff that you guys are doing and learn from it and then amplify it? And I don't have all the details, but I think we need to avoid the problem of captains.com. Was it companycommand.com.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm starting here. Where it comes in, and I think they just shut it down. And I think part of it is it's very hard to run something like that within a large organization, even with the best of intentions.
Right.
Yeah.
So I almost, for example, with Def, like the worst thing that could happen is that they institutionalize it, and there's someone who's in charge of it, because all of a sudden, no longer nimble.
Well, the reason why I bring that up is because I was listening to a recent podcast, Tim Ferriss's podcast, and they actually had General retired Stanley McChrystal on there, and his former aide-de-camp, who used to be a former Navy SEAL officer, and so they were talking about why they stood up the McChrystal Group, which is essentially a group that Stanley McChrystal and a team of prior military leaders have started up to influence leadership in an innovative way to organizations in the civilian sector, and they take the model that they learned from fighting Al-Qaeda in Iraq in the small networks and how fast those things communicate and how efficiently they are, whereas you have this big old clumpy army, real slow and methodical, mechanical to react. And so that is becoming more and more apparent these days, these small pockets of faster networks making things more efficient across the board. So,
yeah, and I think that we also need to then figure out bridges between what's happening within the walls of the military and civil society, whether it's universities or whether it's businesses. I think that the threat that we face from ISIL is huge. And we're not doing a very good job as a country at all, either fighting back or trying to win that war, or not trying to win in that war, but having strategies that actually have a chance of really winning. And the amount of distrust between, especially tech folks and the military, is astounding to me. One of my friends used to work for Google, and they found out that through Snowden that there were fiber optic wires were cut, and the NSA apparently put on some kind of machine and started kind of reading all their correspondences, and they're like, "Yeah, we're not going to never trust anyone in the military." I was like, "Wait a second, have you actually ever talked to anyone in the military?" "No." "You had a beer with someone?" And like, and it's like, can't we as Americans just say, yes, stuff happened in the past, we can debate it until the end of time, but how are we actually going to have these kind of agile organizations? And it's not just in a counterterrorism perspective. I'm sure there's some guy who's worried about, I don't know, Kazakhstan or whatever, and the threat that's there. Like, how do we create these little pockets that can then make us actually prepare for the threat that we don't know yet exists?
Sure.
Yeah. You talked a minute ago, Ori, about the gray area between institutionalized organizations that are kind of officially sanctioned versus stuff like DefChat or Defense Entrepreneurs and Leadership on Tap and all the other different Military Writers Guild is another one. And I wanted to kind of talk about, you talk in your book, The Chaos Imperative, about white space and the importance of white space for digesting different experiences and really gaining insight. So can you discuss just for a few minutes here about white space, more particularly, what are some ways in which we can create white space in our own organizations, and then not just that, but in our careers and in our lives in general?
Right. It's so tempting, especially given how busy we all are, to make every minute be as efficient as possible. And there's a really interesting study. A group of researchers put a video camera in a conference room, and they just try to find out how the meeting would go. And after filming a bunch of meetings, they found that the most effective part of the meeting, in terms of getting stuff actually done, was either right before or right after, when people are sitting around with their coffees. And that during the meeting, because you have your agenda, because and granted you need to get through stuff, but it constrains the ability to actually connect on a human level and to actually innovate. And because we're so intent on measuring results, you would never think about taking, I don't know, a senior officer's time and say, okay, here's an hour and we're going to have a meeting, we're going to have a bunch of folks, we don't know what we're going to talk about, but we'll hang out. And yet, look at you guys here. Look at what we're doing now. It's like it's unstructured, and there's benefit to that. And I think instead of pounding on the walls of organizations saying like, "Hey, don't have agendas or meetings anymore," and then seeing the system collapse, brown bags, encourage the profession of arms, encourage this kind of stuff where you're out of uniform, everyone knows your role and rank and stuff like that, but you can still speak much more freely. I also think that there's good reason for shutting down the officers' clubs and both the drinking and some of the behavior that was going on there. And that being said, I don't know if there's as much of a forum where people can just hang out and get to know each other and kind of shoot the shit.
Nice, nice. So that kind of leads into the next question we have for you, but really all about legacy organization. This doesn't just have to be the Army or Department of Defense, but really any legacy or organization that has a strong tradition, that they really have almost set in their ways. How can those types of organizations build a culture of integration or a culture of innovation, really from the grassroots level, both from guys and gals that are in the mid-grade ranks, all the way up to some of the senior leaders that are willing to listen and really facilitate the change?
I think it's about figuring out ways of people connecting with each other based on their passions or their skills. And that it's really these modular circles, if you will, of pockets of chaos that change the culture, not the other way around. So I was talking to a senior leader, and they were saying, well, I'm going to ask everyone in my organization to give me at least one suggestion a month. And I was like, that's a horrible idea. For one, not everyone's suggestion is going to be good. Second, not everyone's going to have an idea. Not every single person needs to be creative in the organization for it to function. We can have someone who's just like a bean counter and just whatever, make sure that everything is running. That being said, rather than thinking about everyone has to give me a suggestion, say encourage people to get together in groups of 8 to 16 and start innovating and say, you know what, if you have an idea, the group can then send it to me and I will directly talk to you about it. The reason that it's good to do it through a group is A, there's diversity inside the group, but B, it also takes away a reality that it's very easy to sit here and say like, well, everyone should be innovative. And one of my friends, Steve Rotkoff, I mentioned in the book from Rentham University, says no one ever gets fired for not innovating. Right? So you're actually taking a risk when you when you have a creative idea, and if you fail, that failure is not going to be necessarily rewarded. So what you need to do, and the reason to do it within groups of 8 to 16 or larger, is you create the innovation within the groups, and then if there's failure, the failure is from the group, not from any specific individual. Or if the idea sucks, it's the group's idea, not an individual who's then embarrassed.
Ori, in Chaos Imperative, you talked about briefly planning serendipity.
Mm-hmm.
What exactly are you referring to here, and why is it so important? If you can kind of elaborate on that.
Sure. You look at Silicon Valley and you look at the amount of companies that started either in or around Stanford or in that geographic area. A lot of those were just chance encounters where people happened to be in the same place and all of a sudden happened to share a common interest. And with the white space and with what I call unusual suspects, right? So getting people in the room or in a place where they wouldn't naturally be interacting with one another is essential. And all of a sudden, then you're creating the opportunity for serendipity to happen. If you're taking a very, very structured approach to a meeting or to an organization, you're not going to have that serendipity because every minute is accounted for. So on the one hand, you have dependability, but the other one, it's very difficult to reconcile with creativity and change.
Yeah. Ori, that kind of leads into, we've had some folks that are texting in or commenting some questions. So we're going to jump over to one of our viewers here, Casey Dean, and it ties right into what you just said. And his question is, in the fine balance of bonding with those in common and preventing groupthink, how can we build an innovative culture that isn't a mirror image of ourselves?
It's a good question. I think groupthink is definitely something that we have to be concerned about. So the way I run meetings, whether it's in the Army or whether it's in corporate America, is you don't start with everyone just sitting around just with blank faces. One of the first exercises I do is I get people to stand up, because when you stand up, your just blood flow is different. You're thinking in a different way. And then reflect on a question for 60 seconds. So 60 seconds. Think about how many times you go into a room like, okay, blah, 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 we're going to solve that. So reflect on a question, write it down on a note card, and find a partner for 30 seconds. Talk, like you decide who's talking first, who's talking second, A or B. A talks first for 30 seconds, then B talks for 30 seconds, and done. And the nice thing about that is every single person now has had an opportunity to have a voice and has written something down. The way that the Supreme Court, when they start processing their decisions, is they have a rule that no one talks until everyone has talked at least once. And the best way of functioning as a group isn't necessarily in the large segments, but it's in these pairs, it's in groups of 4, it's in groups of 3. And you keep on breaking it up. People have this misconception that chaos means like there's no agenda, we're just meandering, we're talking about the moon and Saturn and what have you. No, contained chaos means having a very concrete process, but that fleshes out and keeps on mixing it up, so we're not just sitting around our desks checking email and being bored by PowerPoint.
Ori, for those folks who haven't read the Starfish and the Spider,
You should.
They definitely should.
Right.
They definitely should. Can you give us a brief synopsis of the analogy there, and what is it? How does it apply to us in this setting? Yeah.
So I ran through it very quickly in the beginning. You cut off the head of a spider and it dies, and you cut off the arm of a starfish, it grows one back. That's because unlike the spider, who has a tiny little brain, the starfish doesn't have a central head. So each one of the organs are replicated across the entire organism. And no one even knows, scientists haven't actually figured out how starfish exactly move. Like one arm moves this way and one arm moves this way, and they kind of figured out amongst themselves. Yeah. You think about that as a metaphor for business and society. Think about Alcoholics Anonymous, Wikipedia, Craigslist, unfortunately Al-Qaeda. The harder that we fight against these organizations, the stronger they become. The more we cut an organization like Al-Qaeda in half, the more we take out their head, the more distributed they become, the more spread out they become, and the more difficult they become to control. You think about that via the lens of terrorism. You think about that via the lens of the Silk Road, which is a site where people are buying drugs and also sort of contraband. You think about it in terms of the music industry, that the harder that studios fought against the music industry, against peer-to-peer shares, the more distributed they became. All of a sudden, we went from Napster to Kazaa, and eventually email. No one even knows who started email. Who are you going to go after anymore? I think, unfortunately, we're starting to see that in terrorism, right? Where okay, they're going to vacuum here for a little bit, so I'm going to move. I might move you guys in a second. So that the more that you try to fight these organizations within traditional means, the stronger they become. So we're going to move together.
You got to be a starfish here.
I'm at University of North Carolina doing an event here. So
nice. This is awesome. This is a serendipitous moment, right?
This is like the West Wing.
Oh, nice. Nice. So while you're walking, I'll tee up the next one here for you, Ori. You talked about, and I think it's pretty clear, the difference between the spider and the starfish. With the spider, the first thing that comes to my mind, and probably a lot of people watching or listening, is the spider is a lot of the traditional organizational setup, whether it's a very hierarchical, military could probably fall into that, the spider in that analogy, whereas the starfish is a lot more, there isn't a lot of hierarchy. It may be pretty horizontal when it comes to a hierarchy, and everybody kind of has a say, or maybe there isn't a set leader. So, my question along those lines is, with those characteristics, are these two styles mutually exclusive, or can organizations include principles from both styles of a spider organization and a starfish organization?
Right. So that's a fantastic question. It would be naive to imagine that we don't need spiders, or even that starfish organizations are any better than spider organizations. The real interesting thing happens is when you look at the combo special, right? How can you create starfish within spiders? How can you create these pockets of chaos? How can you take some of these lessons in terms of giving everyone a voice, trying to find catalysts that create networks? How do you enable leaders to leverage the pre-existing and new networks within their organizations?
Ori, we're going to read a question here. We've got some fans here, just like Mike alluded to, that are listening live here. But one question comes in from Gary Klein. He says, admitting that I haven't read The Starfish and the Spider, what organizations have been the most successful at being starfish-like, and how have they been successful operating like that?
So a lot of the businesses that have been most starfish-like have happened on the web, just because the price of starting a business has gone down so dramatically. So Craigslist, right? Anyone can post an ad. And when was the last time you picked up a newspaper? You think of Wikipedia and how it's a very starfish. I see some books in back of you, but I don't see any set of encyclopedias anymore, right? When was the last time you went and bought an encyclopedia?
Sure.
Music industry is completely transformed because people are able to produce music and put it on YouTube for very little money. You think about the film industry and how much it's shifted. Publishing is about to shift very radically in terms of a more starfish approach. So it's all these information businesses that are having the most differences.
Yeah. So kind of to dovetail that last question, James Smith, who's also watching here.
I know James Smith, I think. I
do you?
AJ.
Okay, well, shout out to James Smith. Ori knows you. Ori knows A. James Smith. So he asks, how can we be starfish in a spider organization? Which, I think this question, Tristan and I have wrestled with this during our time on active duty, is you want to innovate, you want to be creative, you want to do things maybe a little bit different, think outside the box, all those cliches that I just threw out there. But a lot of times it's pretty challenging to do in a spider organization. So how do guys and gals like us that maybe think that way, how do we make a difference? How do we be a starfish in a spider organization?
I think the biggest thing that you can control within an organization is time. And the way that we spend time convening, in most organizations, just sucks. It really is a very poor way of having information share or creating innovation. The Red Team University is doing some really cool things where I believe it's going to start being mandatory throughout the Army, where people are learning techniques of how do you run a meeting in a way of getting knowledge from the edge. So that's the first thing you can do. You can really think about, don't think about being a starfish in a huge taking over the organization way. Think about it hour by hour. How can you make this specific hour more starfish-like? And the second is what you guys are doing in terms of innovating on the sidelines. Still adhering to the ethics and values of the organization, but having the freedom where failure is not catastrophic. I had a conversation with someone about acquisitions, right? And imagine that you're the person acquiring whatever, a vehicle. And let's say that option X has cost, I don't know, $10 million. And option Y, the same vehicle that has a little bit more shield, that maybe has a 1% chance of saving a soldier's life, costs $12 million. Are you going to be the acquisitions person who doesn't spend an additional $2 million if someone, God forbid, was to get injured or die in combat, and because you wanted to save the $2 million? The bureaucracy is not going to be friendly to it's going to be so risk averse. So that we have to take failure into account. And I love what you guys are doing, but if you fail, the army will still go on.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be able to function. And that's the great thing about it, is that failure is not critical in this case. And find ways in which you can fail on the outskirts, on the sidelines of the organization, whether it's in terms of an initiative or even an hour that you spend talking about something, and then whatever, if it fails, whatever, spend an hour, no big deal. So think really small in terms of making huge change in the military.
Yeah, that's good. So it really kind of brings up the crux of the issue for a lot of folks, and that is, especially this day and age in the Army and probably in the other services as well, it's very much a zero defect attitude that you can't fail. So if we want to, implement some of those starfish principles, what would you say, if you could narrow it down to just a couple or a handful? What are the most important principles of a starfish organization that maybe are pretty realistic or somewhat realistic for organizations like the Army to begin to implement?
Sure, and I have to run away from the vacuum again. I'm so sorry, guys.
Being chased.
Yeah, it's like, it really is. I'm sure he'll catch up with me in a sec. Welcome to University of North Carolina, everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tar Heels.
I think that the biggest thing that we can do is we can change, and we've alluded to this a little bit, is we can change the culture, and specifically we can engender trust within the organization. So how much time are we actually spending with our fellow service members, right? Just getting to know them, just creating emotional bonds. And again, how can we fail? Like, worst comes to worst, what, people started to get to know each other better, and you think about even returning from combat, right? In wars of old, you go on a ship, right, and have a month to sit there and just talk about what happened and how you're doing. And we don't have that anymore. You're getting on a plane, and 18 hours later, you're back home. And that white space, that ability to actually connect with one another, is being so diminished. Once you create the trust-based systems, is when you can actually get some stuff done, because then you have enough trust to create these circles, to operate in the margins of the organization, and to actually come together around shared values. You think about the military and you think about Starfish, every Starfish organization is built on values. Alcoholics Anonymous, right? Very clear values. Wikipedia, unfortunately even Al-Qaeda. And we all know that the military is based on values. It's a volunteer force that is there because you're committed to the mission. How do we build trust and do projects that enhance, that are based on our shared values?
Yeah, Ori, there's, being in the military for the last 10 and a half years and a commander 3 times, I can tell you it's very difficult for these leaders to really be the change, or an innovative leader needs to kind of speak up and be able to feel like there's a culture of trust where they can say something without feeling like that was a stupid question or making a mistake, or the fear of failure. I think you spoke about the fear of failure in your Sway book. Is that right? You talked a little bit about that?
Loss aversion. We have huge loss aversion, and we're never going to be able to change that, right?
Yeah.
So we talk about zero defect. I don't think it's going to change, right?
Yeah.
We talk about being able to speak up and not being reprimanded. You know what? That's not going to change. What we can change, though, is we can change how you can speak up. So, and again, these are very simple tools. One of the things I do, I'm about to do it tomorrow with the group of generals here at North Carolina, is you have a question that you ask the group, and it's oftentimes best if it's a how question. How can we more effectively, I don't know, how do we get more soldiers to do PT? Something like that, you know, that there's not a clear yes or no answer on. And then people write down their answers on a note card. And they then all stand up and they swap note cards. And then you read someone else's note card, and on the back you evaluate the idea from a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being really good, 1 being really bad. And you do that 5 total times. So by the end, you have note cards that are basically will have a number on them between 5 and 25. And then I do a reverse auction. And remember, the note cards don't have anyone's name on there. And I say to people, like, if I call out and someone reading an idea and it's not, it's your idea, celebrate, but celebrate inside in a quiet voice. Mm-hmm. And you start 25, 24, 23, 22, and those are the ideas that emerge. So everyone was able to actually contribute something, and then you're actually using a group process to evaluate what's better than not. Brainstorming is a wonderful thing, but it has a lot of problems. There's a problem with groupthink. There's a problem of not wanting to speak up. There's a problem of the person with the pen. If they didn't hear you well, like that idea is not going to go on the board. And there's also the problem of assuming that every idea is born equal. It's not. Some ideas are better than others. Some ideas suck. Some people get, like, you know, you might be really smart, but your ideas on the note card exercise only get a 5. At the end, what I do is I collect all the cards and you keep them. And I've done this with a group of 1,000 people and just say, here's all the comments, and then the commander can actually sit there and review them and look at them and see what everyone else thought of those comments. So again, it's a process, and what we're trying to do is we're banging our head against the wall saying, like, well, you know, it's an environment where it's zero defect, and, you know, I'm going to be punished for my failures. Yeah, that will always happen. You have to live within those constraints.
Sure. And when we talk about kind of going back to being a starfish and what we can do in our organizations, I knew, you know, I was in a battalion, and I had a battalion commander, you know, in 05 that I felt was kind of he was okay leader. He wasn't exceptional, but he wasn't obviously, you know, the worst. But I felt like I needed to do things for my company, or else, you know, this was my last and third company. So it was one of those things where I felt like I needed to make a change. And if he was a roadblock, then I needed to be able to make that change along with his values and the ethics of the Army and the unit to make sure that I was within his left and right limits, if you will. But my impact was, how do I affect the soldiers, you know, below me that I'm responsible for? And one of our inherent roles as a leader is to develop leaders and maximize performance. In your book, Sway, you talk about the Pygmalion effect and the Gellum effect. Can you talk about that and how that affects our organizations and how leaders can implement that?
Yeah, so just simply diagnosing a subordinate as being, there's a number of studies, one of them with Israeli soldiers, the other one was with school teachers. And school teachers were told, hey, these 3 students are actually hidden geniuses. And although it wasn't at all based on IQ, still the students whom the teachers thought were smart ended up performing much better on tests. Same thing with soldiers and ability to cross an obstacle course. And when the commander was said, hey, these folks are actually really talented, then they end up performing much better. And what we can do in order to avoid that is really try to figure out how do you get the ideas in an anonymous way, as opposed to just kind of pointing to the same folks that you always have to give you the same old tried answers.
Very cool. This one's from Joe Byerly. He asked, do you think organizations like Defense Entrepreneur Forums, the Military's Writers Guild, and projects like the Leadership on Tap are going to keeping, you know, are they key to keeping Starfish in the organization?
I think they're key to the success of the organization. I think that, again, I mentioned this briefly, but I think that the closing down of clubs is, I think this is this is a better iteration of figuring out ways of just idea exchange and connecting around specific skills or interests. So I think they're not just important to keep starfish alive, but they're vital to the ultimate success of the entire military. And shout out to the Military Writers Guild.
Right on.
Yeah. So Ori, as we kind of get close to wrapping up here, I know you've been so gracious with your time, and we appreciate it. And we want to maybe wrap up. I know before the vacuum comes, we gotta wrap things up here. But we'll leave you with one last question here, and it's probably just to sum up everything we've been talking about this afternoon. Maybe if you could leave us with your top 2 or 3 tips for implementing a culture of innovation in an organization that maybe is not so innovative.
Sure. I would say first, draw knowledge from the edge. By the fact, if you're a superior, by the fact that you're coming into the room, all of a sudden people will shut down. 2 is build trust by creating emotional connections. And 3, think about it in small little time chunks, like what we're doing right now. Innovate at the sidelines of their organization.
Awesome.
Very cool.
Awesome. Ori. Yeah. Well, thank you again, Ori, for your time. This has been phenomenal, and you've been very gracious to run around the hotel there, or UNC, I should say.
No worries. My pleasure. And guys, keep in touch, and please, you guys and also people, the Hangout, like, get in touch. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help. This is important, not just for the military, but for our country. So I appreciate what you're doing.
Sure, Ori. How can folks reach out to you? What's the best way we can kind of reach out to you and contact you?
Ori at siliconguild.com. Very
cool.
Awesome. And I understand your mom runs your Twitter for you and all your social media. Is that right?
She should be very happy. You can tweet her and tell her how this went, and then she can have it.
Nice.
Very cool.
Nice. Well, thank you again, Ori. Enjoy your time there in North Carolina. And again, thank you so much for joining us today.
Cool. My mom's Twitter is @Ori'sMom.
Ah, okay.
Very cool.
@Ori's mom. We'll get that in. We'll get that in for sure.
Okay, guys.
Thanks, Ori. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Take care.
All right, folks, that concludes the inaugural DefChat 2015. I want to say thank you again to Defense Entrepreneurs Forum for putting this thing on. It was Tristan and my honor to host it, and hopefully the start of many more to come. We'd love to hear your feedback. If you're on this site, leadershipontap.us/DefChat 2015, leave your feedback for us. What do you want to see in the next one? What did you particularly appreciate about this interview? What types of guests do you think that we should have on these DefChats? I know that Joe and Ben and the entire team over there at Defense Entrepreneurs would appreciate your feedback. So we will make sure they get that as well, and we'll continue to innovate on the edge, as Ori alluded to. So with that, folks, we want to thank you again for tuning in. We will keep this page live for you. So we'll have the replay. It'll be ready. I think it takes a couple hours for Google to do their thing, but it'll be embedded right here on this page. You will have the ability to come back and watch. And we may end up syndicating the audio on the Leadership on Tap podcast as well, because phenomenal stuff from Ori, and we want to make sure it's not just out there on the Defense Entrepreneurs site, but also through all the other organizations that we mentioned that are out on the edge innovating. So thanks again for showing up if you're here live, and if you're watching this or listening, thanks for tuning in. Anything else, Tristan?
Nope. Enjoy, and we will see you guys on the next one.
Cheers.